Good evening. Baruch Hashem, starting a brand new Maseches Nedarim. A whole bunch of introductory remarks. First of all, we're learning Seder Nashim. The halachos of Nedarim apply to men and women equally. So some of the Meforshim are bothered by the fact that Nedarim is in Seder Nashim. Put it somewhere else where it makes more sense. Some of the Meforshim explain that, as we've seen throughout Ksubis and throughout Yevamos, that because a husband is able to be mefer nedareha, he's able to undo a neder that his wife makes. So there's a uniqueness, there's a chiddush in that fact that a husband is able to be mefer his wife's neder, and therefore Nedarim is in Seder Nashim. Very interesting presentation of that idea. A couple of unique things about the layout over here. First of all, on the inner margin where we have Rashi, according to nearly everyone, this is actually not Rashi. This commentary is referred to as the Mefarish. We don't know who it is, but for those who are, and I'm not one of them, but for those who are like really familiar with Rashi's profile, you'll see a bunch of things that don't fit here. Even the Beis Yosef, in halachic terms, the Beis Yosef was the author of the Shulchan Aruch. He lived in the 1500s. When he referred to this commentary, he refers to this person as the Mefarish and not as Rashi, and he doesn't do that for other Rashis throughout Shas. So this Rashi is not Rashi. Therefore, we had to have a pshat-based type of commentary on the page, and that the Meforshim have selected the Ran. The Ran is quite long-winded, as you can see here. So normally when we have a very short blot with a lot of Tosvasim, that's usually terrifying in regards to Lamdus. But here we don't have to worry about that. The Ran was really, he's going to be a Pashtan over here, even though it's somewhat lengthy, but most of the length of his writing is because he doesn't write concisely. He's quite verbose. So that's why the pages look the way that they do. The last Dvar HaKadama is that you'll also note that the tone and the flavor of the Masechta has a little bit of a Yerushalmi vibe to it, a little bit. I know we haven't learned Yerushalmi other than, snippets and shkalim a little bit. We've had like a couple of small pieces. According to some, the Masechta of Maseches Nedarim was actually not found initially in Seder Bavli. And the Meforshim write that this Masechta was not reviewed twice by Rav Ashi as every other Masechta was. So a lot of the linguistics that we're used to, they're just not present, or they're slightly different. And is it because of Yerushalmi, because it was learned there, and when Rav Ashi, because he didn't edit it the way that he did other Masechtas, so therefore it's a little complicated, the historical piece as to what happened. But so we'll see a little bit of quirks and a little bit of uniquenesses. I will be utilizing both the Mefarish and the Ran, but primarily the Ran. It really depends on which Mari Makom makes the most sense for us. So without any further ado, we're going to get started. I should say one more Dvar Hakdama, and that is that we've learned in Shas earlier that Be'avon Nedarim Banim Mesim, that Nedarim has some serious consequences. And in fact, as we begin Yom Kippur with Kol Nidre, we always have to, it's like bothered a lot of people. What's with the Kol Nidre at the beginning of Yom Kippur? So it has to do a lot with Dibur. And we know from the Chachamim, Lo Matzasi Yofem Mishtika, that silence typically is the better route than speaking. And all of these ideas are kind of the undercurrent of what's going on here, which is our words really matter and are halachically binding. There are things that we can say that will be mechayev us to the point that if we don't fulfill them, we will have violated the Isra of Nedarim or Shvuos or Charamim, all of the terms that we say in Kol Nidre that we don't know what they mean, because when ArtScroll translates them, they're like a bunch of synonyms of the same thing. They're not all the same thing, and we'll get into some of those differences tonight. Now let's get started. Okay. If you don't know where we are, that's your fault. We're starting. Says the Gemara opening in the Mishnah, Kol kinui nedarim kinedarim. Any nickname, any similar type of language, which is a neder language, is treated exactly like a neder. So the formal neder language is X. Here, you're just 1 degree of separation. We still consider that to be the same thing as a neder. In other words, your neder is still binding, even if it's a kinui. V'charamim kecharamim. And if you have a cherem, which we're going to discuss in the Gemara on Daf Yud, we're going to get into more of these discussions. V'charamim kecharamim, the nicknames of charamim are also considered like a cherem proper. Ushvuos keshvuos. And when we talk about a shvua, a kinui of a shvua, a nickname of a shvua, that 1 degree of separation language is also true by a shvua. Unazirus kinazirus, the same is true by nazirus as well. So then the Gemara goes from talking about a kinui to talking about another type of shvua. Really, it's not a type of shvua. It's really just a way to say the shvua, which is referred to in the Gemara as yados. Yados is basically when the shvua that you make is backhanded. it's not said in a normal way of like hare alai X, Y, or Z, but it's kind of said as the Gemara says, ha'omer lechavero mudrani mimcha. Even though you didn't say I am madir hana from you, but you said mudrani, I'm already mudar, even though you never said that we're taking a neder from against you. It's like a passive language. Or mufreshani mimcha, I'm separated from you. Meruchakani mimcha, I'm distanced from you. Shani ochelach, I put restrictions on me about eating at the same table as you. Shani toimlach, that about eating foods together. Aser. Everyone holds that the yados, this second degree of separation language. Right, so the first we have Nedarim themselves. Kinui is one degree of separation, and that's really the same thing, just in different words. And then the second degree of separation is Yados. It's just I'm keeping a distance from you, and the Gemara seems to say that that's usher, that actually is binding, and that's a little bit scary. It's not would you use it lechatchila? It's if you use it, are you in the world of Nedarim right now?
It seems to me like you use it, maybe not doesn't really want to do that. Why would is the
If let's say you and I are in the middle of a fight and I say, Mufreshani mimcha, I'm keeping a distance from you. I say it out of frustration. Is that a neder or is that not a neder? We're asking like the limits, right? That's like in halachic terms, whenever we learn Shas, whenever we learn Gemara, we're always testing the outer limits so we know where halacha actually lies. That's why my son came home from shiur and he learned the same Gemara that we learned about many moons ago, where this how does one have tashmish amita without yediyah? So if the man falls off the building and he ends up. So my son came home, he's like, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. That's unreasonable. It's not even normal. So I said 100%, and it's never happened. Lo haya v'lo yihye. But the reason we learn it is to learn the outer limits of halacha so that we know where the safe boundaries are, so that we know where the red lines are. So here too, if I say to Stan, Mufreshani mimcha, I've had enough of you. So is that neder language where I therefore have to really actually separate from you? So those are yados. What?
I'm taking a break. It's not a neder. It's just.
The Gemara says you're wrong. The Mishnah says that that's aser. They're called yados. Now, we can't learn too much from this exact language because there may have been a full sentence around that. We have to learn the full context of the Mishnah. We're only learning a Mishnah, so we just have brush strokes now. So we have Nedarim, and then we have 1 degree of separation is kinui, and 2 degrees of separation is yados. So let's continue with the last part of the Mishnah. If a person says minude ani lecha, that there's nidui between me and you, Rabbi Kiva haya chochech bazeh lehachmir. Very, very, very unique language for Mishnayos, where Rabbi Akiva was chochech. He was debating. He was unsure. Rabbi Akiva was unsure about it. It's like it's hard to even imagine that there is such a thing. So even over here, if you look in the very bottom of the Mefarish, the last Mefarish on the page where the Rashis would be, Dibur Hamaschal Rabbi Akiva hayachochech bazel lahachmir hava mechachech lahachmir to aser the aser nami de inyan nederhu velo barrier lay. It was unclear to him if this particular language of menude ani lecha was considered problematic. Rabbi Akiva was machmir. That takes us to the first turn of the page of this Masechta, Beis Amud Beis, top of the line.
Does Kavanah have an effect on this?
Yes, Kavanah does have an effect on this. So, like if you're reading the script of Hamlet, and in the script of Hamlet it says Mufreshani mimcha, and you're sitting in the room, pashut that's not a neder for sure. You also can't just think it. So there has to be a combo deal of a certain level of yediyus coupled with saying the right words. And the words are not incantations per se. They can't, like, you're not a golem. You have intent when you're saying them. So we have to figure out, we're way too early. Yes, it's the right question. That's what the Masechta is all about, is how do we know when our intent and when our language brings us into the category of neder? Because that's when things get really, really complicated. We did see a Gemara recently, I think in Ksubis. I think the Gemara said, even if you make a neder and you keep it, you get some kind of negative curse. I can't remember the exact. Can't remember exactly what it was. Yeah, but this was even by nedarim that you keep, even if you're doing. Yeah, but this wasn't that. The Gemara wasn't talking like that. It was yeah.
Basically, it's effective. It doesn't. There's no, based on what he said, it's an iron.
Right. Unbelievable. That's half of a fella. It's not normal. I remembered that I learned Maseches Ksubis just broadly. I don't even know. I think it's in Ksubis, and that was only yesterday. I don't think I could teach yesterday's off again. I trust you. All right, the Gemara starts at the top with some challenges to our Mishnah. We had said kol kinui nedarim ki nedarim. We said that all of the 1 degree of separation comments are treated like the comment, like the actual perfect form of saying Harei Alai, whatever the case may be to make a neder. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second. Mishnah, why is it that our Mishnah is different than Maseches Nazirus? Gabe Nazir delok tani luhu lekulhu. I saved my bookmark here. I'm going to read you the first line of Nazir. Kol kinui Nazirus ki Nazirus. Done. So in Nazirus, it only talks about Nazirus. What did we talk about in our Mishnah? Shvuos and the Nedarim and Nazirus and Charamim. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. By Nazir delok tani luhu lekulhu. There we didn't speak about all of the various options of kinuyim, only one. Umayshna gabe nedarim dektani lekuhu. So why is it that the first Mishnah in Nazir and the first Mishnah in Nedarim are not congruent? Why don't we have either one in each one or all in both? Both. What?
Like a klal and a prat?
The rules of klal and prat only apply and exclusively apply to psukim. So, no, they'll only apply to psukim. That's Rabbi Shmuel's Yud Gimel Midos was the lens through which we look at psukim. It's a very narrow scope of application. The Gemara, if there are psukim that back this up, then maybe, but that's not what the Gemara says here. The Gemara says the reason why is mishum the neder ushvua ksiv gabe hadade. In our Mishnah, in our Masechta Nedarim, the reason why our Mishnah speaks about both neder and shvua is because there's a pasuk. Look in the Ran on line 2, Dibur Hamaskil, neder ushvua ksiv gabe hadade. What's the pasuk? The pasuk says, Tichsiv ki yidor neder lahashem ohi shava shvua. Oh, so what do we see? Same pasuk, Nedarim and Shvuos are discussed. So now we understand why our Mishnah, which is speaking about Nedarim, adds in Shvua. And therefore, Tani Tartain, we taught those two. And the cave and the Tani Tartain, once we were already teaching two, we already broke the mold of Nazir, which only spoke about Nazirus. Therefore, Tani Lakula, we threw everything in the kitchen sink. We just made sure that we were really thorough at that point. Whenever we see lists in Mishnayos, we always have to ask ourselves, is this list exhaustive? Or is this list just a set of samples? Because we need the scope of, so here the Gemara is sharing that concern. Once you open that can of worms, go all out. Don't leave anything out, because then if you only put in the Nedarim and Shvuos, oh, maybe Charamim are different, maybe Nazir. No, they're not different. They're all the same. In all cases of Neder, of Shvua, of Charamim and Nazirus, there's the ideal way to take it, and then there's the 1 degree of separation. The Kinuyim apply to both. And the Gemara says 5 lines down, well, okay, if that's true, that Nedarim and Shvuos are in the same pasuk together, and we therefore include them in our Mishnah, V'lisni kinui Shvuos basar Nedarim. Flip back to our Mishnah. What's weird about our Mishnah? What did we say? What came first? Nedarim, and then Charamim, and then Shvuos. If you're telling me that the pasuk indicates that both Nedarim and Shvuos are in the same pasuk, why did our Mishnah insert Charamim in between those two things, which should be 2 peas in a pod? The order of our Mishnah is not mashma like the Gemara's answer. You said, the Gemara, you said, oh, no, they're in the same pasuk. That's why we taught Nedarim and Shvuos. And then you look at the Mishnah, but Charamim are in the middle. That's the Gemara's question here. But listening kinu is Shvuos, basar Nedarim. It's out of order. Should have been like the pasuk. The Gemara says, and now we get into a little bit of a distinction between the types of language that we're using in our Mishnah. And the Gemara says, I did the Tana Nedarim de mitzar chefza alei. When a person makes a neder, they're making an item forbidden to them. Therefore, Tananami Charamim, which is similar, Dimitzar Chefza Alei. So by Nedarim and by Charamim, those types of acceptances upon oneself is where item X becomes forbidden to me. Masha'en Kain says the Gemara, La'afuke Shvua, Dika'asar Nafshei Mina Chefza. Okay, there's a big difference. It's a subtlety in what's happening. A neder and Charamim are in the category of I won't drink that can of Coke. Something that I would never say. But when it comes to and then that can of Coke alone is usher to me, right? That's it. But if I say I won't drink any Coke, it's not about the can. It's a din in me. Chefza Gavra is the classical. This is Chefza Gavra. Is my verbal commitment about the item Nedarim and Charamim, that's why they're listed together. Or no, is it like the other profile of verbal commitments, which is internal? It's not external, it's Gavra, it's about me. That's the Chakira. And that is why our Gemara says, this is the first very important distinction in the types of verbal commitments that a person can make. Says the Gemara, fine, I understand, good answer. Next, Pasach bekinuyin. We started out our Mishnah by saying, Kol kinuye nedarim, and then we really gave no examples, and we flipped over right to the second degree of separation, umefaresh yados. So if you look at our Mishnah, the Mishnah is structured in a very strange way. We'll soon see that the Mishnah as we have it is totally incorrect, not only with one major change, with two major changes. We'll get to both of them today. We're going to be learning a blot and a half because it's Thursday. We'll go toward the bottom of Gimel Amud Aleph. So the Gemara is bothered by that. If you're starting out the Mishnah with Kol Kinui Nedarim, then give a bunch of examples of Kol Kinui Nedarim. Why is it that all of the examples in our Mishnah are examples of Yados, the second degree of separation from the actual verbal commitment? And what does it say? It says, Ha'omer lechavero mudar ani mimcha. V'su, and furthermore, the idea of Yados, Inshi, the idea of Yados, you seem to have forgotten. We don't know what Yados are. Tell us what Yados are. The Gemara, this is how the Mishnah starts out. Let's talk about Kinuyim of Nedarim. What are some of the examples? Okay, we're going to skip to Yados now. Let's talk about Yados. So the Gemara. Here's what I found. Siri, sorry. I don't know what I said. Hey Siri, Yados. Very sensitive. So the Gemara says, I don't understand the flow of our Mishnah. And the Gemara says, don't worry. Really, Iri Behon. This is where you see some Yerushalmi styles of language. Iri Behon. Iri is Bavli, but Behon is much more of a Yerushalmi type of word. So Iri Behon, really, don't worry. Our Mishnah is dealing with Yados. It is. And really, our Mishnah has an omission. And here's how our Mishnah should read. Kol kinui nedarim kinedarim v'yados nedarim kinedarim. Now we see both. The first line of the Mishnah changes. You've introduced kinui and you've introduced yados. And then, okay, then go on and give your examples. Says the Gemara, but if the Mishnah, according to this new version, started out with kinui and switched over to yados, if that's true, but lifrosh kinui and beresha, why then are the examples in our Mishnah only examples of yados and not examples of kinui? They're out of order. Says the Gemara, because hahu desalik mine hahu mefarish beresha. If I say I'm going to talk about X and I'm going to talk about Y, we always start talking about Y first. How do we know this? Kiditnan. Famous second parak of Maseches Shabbos. With what can I light and with what can I not light? Which one do we talk about first? The second one, ein madlikin. And therefore our Mishnah is the same. We started with kinui, we switched to yados. Now let's talk about yados. We'll come back to kinui. The Gemara brings another raya. Bameh tomnin uvameh ein tomnin, the Isser D'Rabbanan of Hatmana. What are we allowed to be tomen with and what are we not allowed? What does the Gemara start with? The second one, ein tomnin. And then the third example the Gemara gives, Bameh isha yotza v'meh isha uvameh eno yotza. What types of jewelry is a woman allowed to go out in a rishus harabim with? Yes, this one or that one, yes or no. And the Gemara starts with the second one. So we certainly have precedent for this profile. The Mishnah introduces topic 1 and then topic 2, and it explains topic 2 before topic 1. Normal. Says the Gemara, you clearly haven't learned Shas. That was a balabatisha answer. Why? Because the Gemara says halfway down on Beis and Beis, V'chol heicha de pasach lo mifresh beresha. Every time we open with idea 1 and then switch to idea 2, we always talk about 2 first. That's not true. We sometimes do talk about the first one, and then the Gemara throws half of Shas at this person's recommendation. V'hatnan. And I'm not going to explain each of these sugyas because we're just looking at the structures of these mishnayos. Yesh nochelin umanchilin, nochelin v'lo manchilin. Some inherit and can cause inheritance, and some can inherit and not cause inheritance. Which one are we going to talk about first? Ve'elu nochelin umanchilin. That's the other profile. We're going to talk about 1. We're going to talk about 2. We're going to explain number 1 against the previous model. Yesh mutaros l'ba'alein ve'asuros liyivmein. There are those who are mutar to their husbands and not to their yavam. Yeah, and there are those who are mutaros liyivmein ve'asuros l'ba'alein. Which one do we discuss first? The first one. Ve'elu mutaros l'ba'alein ve'asuros liyivmein. So that's the second one. Yesh, the Gemara keeps going. It's not done yet. It's like when you get someone angry and they start throwing everything at you. The Gemara is like, The Gemara says, hold on. Yesh te'unos shemen ulavana. Some offerings on the mizbeach require oil and frankincense, and some are shemen velo lavona, oil and no frankincense. Ve'elu te'unos shemen ulavona. They talk about topic number 1 yet again. Still not done. One more. Says the Gemara. Yesh te'unos hagasha ve'ein te'unos tenufa, and tenufa velo hagasha. Different forms of bringing korbanos. If you look at the very last 3 lines of the Ran, he explains what Hagasha is and what Tnufa is. The Ran says 3 lines from the bottom. Tunos Hagasha, Shiyagish HaKohen es mincha. He presents the mincha Bekeren Dromis Mizrachis on the southwest corner of the Mizbeach. Skip 1 line. What's Tnufa? Kohen Maniach Yad Yodo Tachas Yad HaBailim Umani. He puts his hands under the hand of the Bailim as they hold the korban and they move their hands together doing the Tnufa. So the Gemara says that there too, back in the Gemara 7 lines from the bottom, Yesh Tunos Hagasha Bein Tunos Tnufa and Tnufa V'lo Hagasha. Which ones to talk about first? Ve'elu Tunos Hagasha. And the Gemara is still not done yet. I thought I was the last one. It's not. There's more. Is this the last one? I don't even know. Yesh bechor lenachala ve'ein bechor lekohen, and there's also bechor lekohen ve'ein bechor lenachala. Which one do we talk about first? The first one. Ve'ez bechor lenachala ve'ein bechor lekohen. So okay, so now the Gemara is done. I think that was five different Mari Makomos to throw at the Gemara to say no way. You wanted to say that our Mishnah fits a pattern. You present topic number 1, and then you present topic number 2, and then you speak about topic number 2, and then come back to number 1. Says the Gemara, with all 5 of these Mari Makomos, that's Pashat not true. That's just not the templating of Shas. It's not correct. So then let's ask our question again. The Gemara has to grapple with that. So the answer cannot be linear. It cannot be binary of this or that. For sure. Yes, but the Gemara's strength in response is that you were binary. You told me everything is 1, 2, 2, 1. Yeah, that means you haven't, forget about Gemara. It means you literally haven't learned Mishnayos. Like that, this is a great question in the Rishonim. What in the world was the Gemara thinking? It is such a bad answer. We knew respectfully, we knew examples that we could have argued against this Gemara. We know in our heads, we would have called it out. So how could the Gemara be so categorical in its presentation of answer number 1 when it's for sure wrong? So it's not here, but generally speaking, sometimes the Rishonim say that the only reason an answer was given was to be knocked down. Sometimes that exists again, generally speaking. I didn't look in the Rishonim here on this topic, but there's what to speak about. So the Gemara says, no, hold on 1 second. Halain, the ones we're talking about here is Mishum de Avshule. They're very noisy. There's a lot to talk about. When there's a lot of halachos, so then the one that has a lot of halachos gets spoken about first. Mefaresh hahu de pasach bereisha. So then when there's a lot of halachos, then we have to talk about that one first. Says the Gemara, that's not true either. That's not true. So what's the Gemara trying to say? The Gemara's answer right now is, what's the general templating? Is it 1, 2, 1, 2? Or is it 1, 2, and then 2, 1? So the Gemara says, it depends how many halachos there are. If there's a lot of halachos, then negative. Okay, that's the Gemara's answer. The Gemara says, no, wait, 2 lines from the bottom. Wait 1 second. Not a lot of halachos there. And still, what do we see? The Katane, Yotza Gamal, that it talks about going out like this or like that. So we see that this answer also doesn't work. Ella, turning to the top of Gimel Amud Aleph, the Gemara gives one possible answer. It's a very difficult answer for me to swallow. My father pointed this out the other night, that Shas is so detailed. So then look at this answer. Elolav dafka. Really, you can't, your question's a bad question. You asked, why is it that our Mishnah is structured? We're going to talk about kinui, we're going to talk about yados, and then it explains yados. We said, why did you explain yados? Go back and talk about kinui first. The Gemara says, really, the order of Mishnayos, what's the template, 1, 2, 1, 2, or 1, 2, 2, 1? The Gemara says, Lav Dafka. Zimnin Mefaresh Ahu de Pesach Beresha, and Zimnin Ahu de Salik Mefaresh Beresha. It just depends. Whoever Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was in the mood to write one way, he wrote. It's very hard to buy, no? Very unsatisfying answer. I mean, you're talking about Rabbi Yehuda Nasi packed into a Mishnah. The Mishnayos are nowhere near the length of Shas. Most of Shas is trying to figure out what Rabbi Yehuda Nasi meant. So he jam-packed in every single word and letter and nuance and order of words.
Explain. That's exactly what he says. That the Tanaim had the right to do whatever they wanted.
For sure they had the right to. That's for sure.
Boy, shop, you're dumb.
But it's just hard to swallow. It's just it's difficult to understand. Then the Gemara gives another answer. By Seima, that really we do have an answer for our specific Mishnah, and this is an implication of a broader answer. Says the Gemara 3 lines down, really yados, really yados, that remember, yados are the second degree of separation. Get away from me, like that kind of language. And then, is that a neder, is that not? Yados, says the Gemara, I did the asyan midrasha, because that is learned out from a drasha, mefarish lahon beresha. Drashas are beautiful. The fact that we were able to make a chiddush from the Torah, beautiful, and therefore we talk about that first. So what does that show us? That maybe the general rule of the templating of Mishnayos depends on whether that halacha was a pasuk in Chumash, or was it a drasha? And a drasha will go first. So then you have to go back through all the cases, and you have to. So we're not doing that, but that's what the Gemara says. Says the Gemara, okay, v'liftach hadin b'reisha. If the drasha of yados is so beautiful to you, so why is the templating of the Mishnah 1-2-2-1? We'll talk about kinui, we'll talk about yados, and then we'll explain yados and back to kinui. If yados is so beautiful because it's a drasha, don't talk about kinui first. Talk about yados first. It's a great question. If you're saying that drashos deserve this priority, this kadimus, then give them the priority and kadimus that they deserve. Start out the Mishnah talking about yados. So there, the Gemara says, miftach pesach bekinuyin deoraisa bereisha. We couldn't do that. We couldn't. It's beautiful, but it's not stronger than a din deoraisa. So therefore, when we have a pasuk in Chumash, that's going to be number one. And v'hadim mefarish yados to asyan le midrasha. Says the Gemara, nice answer, but there's a problem. Hanicha lemanda amar kinuyin is lashon nachron hein. According to one manda amar, when we talk about a kinui in our Mishnah, kinui doesn't actually mean a language that isn't the same, like the same wording. What it means is, instead of saying in Hebrew, Harei alai X, I say in English, I hereby accept upon myself X. It's just lashon nachrim. It's just a foreign language. That makes sense. Ela lemanda amar lashon shabadu lehen chachamim lios noderbo mai ikal. But according to the opinion that says that it's the Chachamim themselves who indicated that this was the case, the language of Kinui, if that's true, then Kinui is also a drasha. And Kinui and Yados are both drashas. Then it's not Deoraisa versus drasha, they're both drashas. So there the Gemara says, Miktani Yados, does our Mishnah even talk about Yados? And then the Gemara says, V'lav chasure kam machzer asla. Don't you already know that the language of our Mishnah is messed up and we need to fix it? Akdim nami v'tani yados. I'm actually going to go along and teach the word yados, and what we're going to see now is the third version of our Mishnah, and the Gemara will conclude with this final presentation of our Mishnah. So I know we started our Mishnah a little bit ago, some 26 minutes ago, but really over here is the right way that our Mishnah should have been written. Third of the way down on Gimel Amud Aleph, the Mishnah says, "Kol." Is the Gemara going to rewrite the Mishnah? And if so, does that change what other people think about what they're doing? Oh, 100%. Yes, so the Mishnah as we have it is incorrect. But the flow of the Gemara was what unearthed that incorrect language. And now we're going to rewrite the Mishnah with proper language. And if we had to paskin a halacha, for example, we'd paskin from the new version. It's the final version, version 2, whatever it is. And that's this. So what's the new version of our Mishnah? Not like we have. Says the Gemara, really our Mishnah should have read like this. Kol yados nedarim. Starting with the yad. Why? Drasha. Beautiful. Kol yados nedarim kinedarim. V'chol kinui nedarim kinedarim. Ve'eluhen yados ha'omer lechaveru. Ve'eluhen kinuyin konem koneach kones. That should be the structure. 1-2, 1-2. But the 1 is the yados. The 1 is the halacha that's learned from a drasha first. And that is going to be yados. So the Gemara, the Mishnah should have presented, hey, I'm going to teach you a din about yados. It applies by nedarim. I'm going to teach you a din about kinuim, which for sure apply by nedarim. Let's go back to point number 1 and talk about yados, and then we'll talk about kinuim. That's what the Gemara says is the appropriate language of our Mishnah. End of that's really part 1 of today's conversation is, most broadly speaking, what is the correct language of our Mishnah? And the answer is right here in these 3 lines. Yad kinui. But look at all the cases of precedent. They're never like that. Cases of right. In regard, it's always big case. It's always the Rosh Prakim, and then you dig into the whatever the Mishnah Brewer is, like the small seif and katana. So this your question is better than my answer. I'm answering based on like what I'm seeing, but in Lumdus I hear you, and in learning I hear you. That makes sense to be able to say, why don't you just talk about one topic and get it over with? 100%. 100%. I don't know why. Again, other than looking at the fact that none of the 10 Mishnayos quoted at the bottom of Beis and Beis do that, which is an answer, but I don't know what's under that. Like why is that? I don't know. And then the Gemara digs in. You just said that we had to rewrite our Mishnah because Yados is a drasha, and drashas are beautiful, and we had to talk about the drasha first. Great. Where do we learn Yados from? Says the Gemara, a third of the way down, but Yados heichaksid. Where do we see this idea that even if someone speaks in a way that's 2 degrees of separation from the right way to speak, it still can be a neder? And the pasuk says, Ish ki yafli lindor neder nazir lahazir lahashem. Okay, that a man, when he is yafli, he is wondrous, and that he is lindor neder, to make a promise, double language. We're going to play off on that in a minute. And nazir lahazir, also double language, lahashem. Vitanya, the Brisa writes, Nazir lahazir. What do we learn from the words Nazir lahazir? That is lasos kinui nazirus kinazirus. That even if someone says commitment to naziros in a language of kinui, that it still counts. And what else do we see? V'yados nazirus kinazirus. This is the drasha that the Gemara deems to be beautiful enough to restructure our Mishnah. That we learn yados from this pasuk. Says the Gemara, how do we know that this also applies to the world of Nedarim? So says the Gemara, Talmud Lomar, Ish ki yafli lindor neder nazir lahazir lashem. Makesh naziros lenedarim. We make a comparison between naziros and nedarim, and as well in the other direction, unedarim lenaziros. And let's learn this out. And this drasha is another 5 or 6 lines, and then we'll stop. Ma nazirus. Asabo yados, nazirus kanazirus. Just like in the world of nazirus, that if you spoke in a language of yados, 2 degrees of separation. If only I was an X. If a person says that they wanted to be an Nazir in that backhanded way, so then that would count. Af nedarim, also behem yados nedarim kinadarim. And what about the flip side, the drasha, the comparison in the other direction? Uma nedarim. Just like with a neder, if a person makes a commitment to a neder and they don't fulfill it, over bebal yachel uveval te'acher, that they violate these 2 isurim, which I'll explain in a moment. Af nazirus, we also bring from the world of nedarim to the world of nazirus a similar set of halachic concerns, which is that you didn't fulfill the commitment that you made. So bal yachel is the isser of not fulfilling a promise, and bal te'acher is not fulfilling it within a time frame that you committed to do so. So let's say a person makes a neder or a nazirus, and they say, I will do X by time Y. That's their neder, and it's 100% binding. And they fail to do it by the time they reach their end of their time they were supposed to finish it, 2 isurei d'oraisa. And what the Gemara is saying is that what we learn from this pasuk is that this drasha brings back for us this isser from the world of Nedarim to the world of Nazirus. And one last piece for today, and the Gemara says, Uma Nedarim, and just like by Nedarim, Ha'av mefer nidre bito, uva'al mefer nidre ishto. A father can undo in regards to nedarim. These are psukim and chumash. A father is allowed to undo the neder of his daughter. A husband can undo the neder of his wife. Says the Gemara, it's not only true by nedarim, it's also true by nazirus. Af nazirus, ha'av mefer nazirus bito, uva'al mefer nazirus ishto. That's what the Gemara says is the drasha. So let's just review. We learned our Mishnah. Our Mishnah was very difficult to understand in regards to its order. And the Gemara concluded that the text of our Mishnah is incorrect because the drasha of Yados was so important to the idea of Yados, the fact that it was learned by a drasha. Therefore, we had to restructure our Mishnah. What was the drasha of Yados? Those are the last 10 lines we just learned based on the pasuk of Ish ki afli lindor neder nazir lahazir lashem. We'll stop right here. On Shabbos, we'll pick up 1 hour before Mincha with another blot and a half. Wishing you all a beautiful night.